Hi, everybody, and welcome again to the Musical Innertube. That over there is John Timpane.
Howdy, folks.
And I'm Don Rooney, and we are talking with Glenn Hamilton. Welcome to the podcast, Glenn.
Hi, Don. Hi, John. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Great to have you here.
Glenn Hamilton is the program director of a radio station in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where I live, WRVV, The River, 97.3. He also is the morning disc jockey, and he has another talent, which we will talk about in a couple of seconds. But first, we want to talk to Glenn a little bit about radio, and then we'll get into his other talent in just a few minutes. But first, Glenn, tell us what the state of radio is right now in your experience working for a medium market radio station.
Well, nobody listens to the radio anymore, Nobody.
I've heard that, yes.
Nobody listens to the radio anymore. Thankfully, that's not true. A lot of people like to say they don't listen to the radio anymore because it's kind of a cool thing to say. And yet when they hop in their car, boom, there we are. It's right there, arm length away, button push away. And we're right in there with all their other apps and iPods and all the other stuff. So actually, quite the opposite is true. The state of radio is actually quite robust, and I'm glad to say. Now, has it evolved and changed, and are people using it differently than they did when the River signed on the air? Most definitely, thanks to the iPod and satellite radio and streaming services and things like that. But it's so cool that you asked me to do this right now, because Edison Research just came out with a study during second quarter, right when the pandemic was just, peaking and people were hunkering down at home. And it says, despite the coronavirus, AM/FM radio, terrestrial radio, remains the nation's leading audio platform with a 43% share of time spent with audio among persons 18 plus. And then it goes on to say the next three sources of audio, music videos on YouTube captured 10% share, owned music, like what you have stored on your computer or iPod, 9%, and the ad-free channels on SiriusXM, 7%, podcasts, 5%. So that's where people's ears are on a weekly basis. At least
that's really fascinating. 40% of the market. That is one. Not only is that surprising, but with all of the talk about alternatives, right, chipping away at radio, to realize it still has 40% of engagement with sound, audio platforms. Is that because people get in their cars and they're captive audiences? I mean, I'm wondering, are they playing it while they're grilling steaks in the backyard? Do we have a sense of where they use it? I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, obviously in cars, in, vehicles, and at work is still a lot of at work listening. But it's interesting that, I work for iHeartRadio, and I think one of the most forward-thinking things the company did almost 10 years ago was develop the iHeartRadio app.
Right.
Because they knew that people's listening habits were changing. People were going to devices. Phones were taking off in a big way. And so it came up with the iHeartRadio app because they wanted to be on everybody's phone and still in the dashboard, because they knew that the auto companies were starting to put apps in cars. And not to get too down off the track, but one of the surveys that came out about 5 years ago, and it still came, they did another one about a year ago. They did major auto companies came out with a survey that asked which of these devices, if we took away, would prevent you from buying a new car. Oh. And they had, CD players, they had USB connection. I forget what else they had, Bluetooth. And then they had AM/FM radio. And by far the number one choice was, if it didn't have an AM/FM radio, they're not buying the car. They at least want the comfort of having the AM/FM radio.
And, the interesting thing is that I have an iPod or an MP3 player that I can hook up in my car, and I do listen to it a lot. But I do find that after a while, I miss the company of people. Now, again, and I've lived my whole life in radio, so maybe that's got a little bit to do with it. but I do miss the company of the people on the air coming in every once in a while saying hi and talking to me.
That's a great point, Don, and that has not changed. We talked about how radio kind of went through that period in the 80s and some of the 90s of just being card readers and shut up and play the music. And then the iPod came along and it changed everything. People were able to get any song, anytime, anywhere they wanted at the touch of a button instantly. And so that really changed the way that people used radio. It took a little while for terrestrial radio to catch up, but we realized that the main strength that we have as a medium is companionship. That's like the number one thing that people use radio for. I like to look back when I was in high school, and we're going back a little ways to like records and cassettes and stuff like that. But when I used to just check out, or I'd get mad at my mom and dad or whatever, or I'd a girl fight, I'd want to go, I'd just lock myself in my room. I put my headphones on, put on an album, Rush or something like that. And I would check out, man. I'd put on the whole side, or I'd work on my homework. But then all of a sudden I'd want to start to wonder what's going on in the world, and just kind of, maybe not even a conscious decision, but then I'd turn on a radio station just to hear that A, everything's all right with the world, and B, I'm not alone. There's that companionship.
That's such an interesting point, that it reconnects you with people. I think most people are aware when they're listening to a station that is all automated. I mean, they still have a bunch of them, right? If you drive cross country, it almost seems like you're listening to the same station sometimes, but it's
for sure.
But I always loved, and I still love, if I'm taking a cross country drive, I love to find a local station where people are actually talking about what's going on. I'd love to hear, hear, just what people are thinking about and talking about just locally,
Sure. And what I think is another interesting thing is I've had in my current job where I work for the state of Pennsylvania, I've had a few occurrences where I've had to drive across the state. And you drive the Pennsylvania Turnpike throughout the middle mountainous areas where there's no real cities, and you get the small towns and you get the smaller radio stations, and that's where they still have all the personalities.
Yes.
The big cities have gone to the Bens and the Franks where they don't have people. They just play your favorite songs and have a little pre-recorded quip. But you go to the smaller towns and they're still stocked with personalities.
Yeah, like here in Harrisburg, we're fortunate that we have a few big legacy stations. And it's interesting about this town. I've been on the river, like we talked about. I've been here since 1992, since we signed on the air. And like I said, that's either awesome or awesomely sad, whichever way you want to look at that. But I'm not the only one. There are other stations in the market that have personalities that have been there for 30 to 20 to 30 years. And that's pretty unheard of in the radio business, town to town, up and down the dial, and that's what I was doing before I got to Harrisburg. So I'm not sure what Central PA has. I mean, I was going to stay in Harrisburg for 2 years and then continue my bounce every 2 years and eventually get into like DC or Philly. But I fell in love with the station. I fell in love with the area that I live in. And I figured, why do I want to fight traffic? And I can have the same job with less headaches. And
exactly.
I don't know. And here I sit, and I've been here.
Well, what you're talking about the Harrisburg area culture, having something to do with the popularity of local personality radio. I learned from Don when Don took me. I was visiting Don in Harrisburg. What is this? More than 30 years ago. And when Don and his wife Lauren were both personalities on the radio, we went to a Renaissance fair. Don will recall this, where we would walk around and just be talking like old friends, and people would recognize Don and Lauren from their voices.
Yeah.
That they knew them so well that to say, wait a minute, you're the guy who does weather, you're the girl who does, you know what I mean? I couldn't, that was so impressive to me. Yeah, I knew that Don was a star, right? Right, Don?
Totally.
Well, when I first moved into the house where I'm living now with Lauren, Lauren was on the air at Wink, which Glenn will remember, was the big radio station in the 80s and 90s here in Harrisburg.
Oh yeah, and they still are. They still, there's three big
They're,
ones. Yeah.
Yeah, they're still a good station, but I think River's a little bigger now. But anyway,
Well, thank you, Don.
You're welcome. And I was working at another station that wasn't quite at the stratospheric levels as Wink. And my neighbor came over and said, "So I guess we have a celebrity in the neighborhood now." And I said, "Yes, we do." And then he said, "So how long has your wife been working at Wink?"
That's great.
So celebrity rises and falls. But,
yes, it does.
Still, one of the other things I was going to mention too is that I know a lot of people are faulting radio now for going to what they call voice tracking, where somebody in another city records drop-ins, and that is played in another city,
right?
So that you don't have to hire a warm body in that other city. But what it did occur to me about that practice is that's not really automation in the sense that they are getting a personality to come in. They're not just using drops of some bodiless voice. They're actually using another personality to come in and try to infuse personality, even if it is remotely done.
It took me, I was back in the early 2000s when that really started to become prevalent. Because let's face it, automation and voice tracking has been around in radio since the late 60s.
Oh, forever.
70s.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, with the reel-to-reel automation. You had your voice guy on one reel, and you had your commercials, cart decks, and then you had your music reels, and it was all synced up, and it would eat the tape, and everybody would lose their minds and run around the radio station going, "Oh my God, it's broken."
Where's the paper copy, right?
Right. So I really believe that if this technology was around 30, 40 years ago, it would have been utilized, we want
to remember that in the old days when they, I'm talking about the 30s now, you would have somebody reading. They would not be at the baseball game that they were calling. They would be reading teletype or some other account of the baseball game. And they often would even play crowd noise beneath, the voice. And this was
theater
done,
of the mind.
Yeah, so they did that. I mean, it's really pretty much the same thing of giving people the sense of being there, right? The sense of a live person at a live event, and it was theater, as you say, for the mind,
right?
But it's
radio's always lied to us.
Dude, that is so true. And the other thing I look at the television, Johnny Carson, David Letterman, Jimmy Fallon. None of those shows are live. They're recorded live, but they're recorded like 6 hours earlier. And, nobody calls them voice tracked,
Exactly.
And it's still the same personality. So I felt, okay, in the early 2000s, I'm either going to track or be tracked. So I wanted to learn how to do it well. And I've voice tracked other stations in other markets for a long time. And I don't take it lightly. Like, I feel bad because I know somebody's job has been taken away. And let's just be honest. That's a fact, but that's happening in every industry, everywhere. Every industry is trying to figure out how they can get the job done with as few bodies as possible, which is sad, but it's true. So I wanted to learn how to track, I knew I'd be tracked. So I take it seriously. It's very important to me to learn as much as I can about the city, about the town, about what's going on in the area, and that I don't just phone it in. My co-host, Amy Warner, who also has been in this market for 30 years, she was on WTPA for years and years. So we do our show not only in Harrisburg, we are simultaneously on in Dover, Delaware, and Erie, PA.
Oh, wow.
And there are 3 different formats, but we deliver unique content to each one every day. So we're doing 3 shows at the same time while the music's playing. And that's only because of the technology that we have in place today. And we're servicing those markets just like if someone were sitting there in the studio.
I do remember talking to Newman, who is the morning guy on the country station that's part of Glenn's complex there, Bob 94. And he would come in on Sunday nights to record, to voice track for a station in San Diego. And I remember him complaining at one point that it was the toughest thing to do during the football season because he wanted to come in and talk about the charges, but the game hadn't been played at the time that he was recording.
Right.
So he couldn't do updates on the football game,
That's
which
true.
was something that everybody wanted to know. So yeah, there are drawbacks to that, even for the people that were voice tracking.
All right. Well, and fortunately on the river, we have all during the week, we have local talent. The only talent that we don't have that's local is at night, and that is Chad Tyson. Now, he works in Pittsburgh. He's on WDVE doing afternoons in Pittsburgh. But he does his show in the evening in real time, meaning that he doesn't track the show at 11 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon. He doesn't start tracking the show till right before 7, and he might wrap up around 9 or 10, even though he's on till midnight. But that's pretty good coverage right there for local radio. For being out of market. And he's probably on 6 other stations around the country.
Let me ask you a question then about the future of radio. Do we have enough bodies to fill, even though the number of jobs is shrinking, do we have enough personalities to fill the slots that are open?
Well, that's a great question, Don. That's been one of my concerns for the past 15 years. You know, there was the intern. Well, first of all, there used to be part-timers. We used to have, like you said, 24/7 coverage. We had to have overnight people. We had to have weekend overnight people.
Oh, yeah.
There was somebody in the radio station all day, every day. And
yeah, that was something that I always said is, well, if I want to keep my hand in radio, they always need weekend people. But with the voice tracking, that isn't true anymore.
Those days, unfortunately, are gone. And I know I'm bursting some people's bubbles right now. That, kind of taking a look behind the curtain. But those days have been over for a long time. Just like the days of they think that we're sitting there playing every song from a CD, every song that you hear. That's not happening either. So the days of having 24/7 coverage are gone. So now those positions to bring somebody in that's just out of high school or just out of college and give them a part-time shift on Saturday afternoons or overnights, those days are gone. So I am concerned about who's coming up, learning how to not only do a music show, but where's the personality coming from? Because that is a unique skill, to learn how to be a personality in front of a microphone and sound like you're talking to just one person, and what kind of stuff do you talk about? And, just like a podcast, that takes a certain skill too, but it's a different skill set. You know what I mean? It's different. Amy and I are trying to do stuff in 2-minute bites. And this is long form programming that I absolutely love to get to stretch out on, as you can tell, because I'm hogging it up. So I apologize for
no
that.
problem.
But you're the guest, you're allowed.
Yeah, it means we don't have to do anything. We're just sitting here. I'm studying the stock market, buying stocks, trading. It's fine. So please continue. What were you saying, Glenn?
So, I don't know who that next group of people are that are going to come up and create the content. And I guess the guys that make a lot more money than I do will eventually figure that out, because I don't see radio going away anytime really soon. Other mediums have been threatening radio for 50, 60 years, ever since television came along. And then it was satellite, and then it was iPods, and then it was, Spotify. And what's next? We're still here kicking.
Just in the history of radio, we had this problem, like you said, in the 70s and 80s, when programming became, okay, just read this card, the greatest music of all time. And that's all you have to do.
Yeah.
We were afraid that we would lose personalities then. And with voice tracking now, I think we're afraid of losing personalities. The other thing is college radio. When I was the manager of my college radio station and John was the manager of his, we had people taking shifts that were learning the trade by trial and error, but it was a little small, 20-watt radio station that went 30 feet. But it was still a good training ground, and you were actually live on the air. You couldn't screw up.
Right.
Or you could, but you learn from that.
I will say this. It's still true that in a lot of places, the most important station is on a college campus. That's still really true. I mean, it's true where I live. The two biggest stations here are XPN, which is at Penn, and the Princeton station, which is,
Sure.
and they, both of those have been around since a long time, and
vital and relevant to this day.
Well, they really are. I mean, XPN is one of those AAA stations which really are our leaders. You would not hear new music if it weren't for them in a lot of cases. So
For sure.
college radio still has this interesting leadership role to play in a funny way, even if sometimes it's a 16-year-old, with a single turntable.
You haven't had to look for warm bodies for your station for a while, but when you do, how would you go about getting them? I know that the ads used to be going out in the trade papers that they needed somebody for a drive slot or something like that, and you'd send in an audition tape, and program directors would listen to it and decide winnow it down from there. What's the process now like?
Well, just being completely candid, if it's a non-drive time position, if it's weekends, if it's overnights, whenever it is, it's going to be, okay, who in the building here wants to pick up an extra shift, or it's going to be somebody from, Pittsburgh or Reading. Now, our little region is Harrisburg, Lancaster, Reading, Allentown. We have a Williamsport. And so we do a lot of sharing of talent in that pool. So somebody from Williamsport might be doing Harrisburg, which is better than San Diego doing Harrisburg.
Oh, yeah.
At least they understand PA and the culture and what's going on here and what people are into. But the fact of the matter is, there is no hiring, right, especially right now after COVID-19. But even before the pandemic, it was pretty tight. I mean, it would have to be somebody got let go in a pretty major position. Maybe they replace it, or maybe somebody's doing 3 jobs now. So that's truly the state of radio right now. And television's not much different at this point.
No, I do remember seeing very recently where every couple of years, CBS Radio decides to do a big purge. And they'll go through all their stations and fire people who have been there 20, 30 years.
Yeah, every company does it. iHeart, Cumulus, Citadel. Actually, Citadel is Cumulus now. So anyway, I mean, that's just kind of, but we really have just described most of corporate America. Right. Unfortunately, everybody's trying to just figure out how few bodies, carbon-based life forms can we get away with and still make billions of dollars in bonuses. So,
hey, Glenn, you mentioned in the polling data that you read at the beginning of the show that one of the big uses of radio is at work. And I think we've all been in a workplace where a radio's been going on, whether it's a factory setting where you're, stacking things and there's a radio, booming, or maybe even at the, the gym where you're lifting weights, and you're hearing the radio in the background. 2 questions here. One, have you ever heard yourself, in a public place? And what's that like when you hear your own voice doing the thing?
It's kind of an out-of-body experience, as close as you can get. It's weird. But sometimes I'll hear like a promo. We do promos that run throughout the day, like what we talked about in the morning or what we're going to do tomorrow. And so sometimes I'll catch one of those and be like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
But you're pretty numb to it by now. I almost tune it out and don't even notice it, to be honest with you. I walk in a place and I'm just really thankful that they have us on. So that's really cool to hear your station on in a place.
I'm really also struck by the way that people use radio in the workplace and what kinds of radio stations they tune to. I was on the phone recently with a brother of mine, and he said, do you realize how often in a lifetime one hears You're an Ocean by Fastball? And it's true. It's one of those songs you will hear a lot. And I think there must be somebody who realized it's sort of a popular song to have on while you're working, because it's sort of straight ahead rock. It's, Austin, Texas band, and it's got that thing. And everyone can think of songs they used to hear a lot in the 90s. I think the second most song was I Love You Always Forever by Donna Lewis, right?
Right.
And it was partly on the strength of workplace playing. It's beautiful to watch. I always love that. I sometimes linger around to listen to what's being played, even if it's like, because I'm an old radio guy. But even if it's symphonic versions of Sting songs, you know, which exist.
I know.
You know,
It's crazy.
But it's a great use because it comforts people. It lets them do what they do every day. It's sort of it's very moving to hear them living with music, which is really what it is.
It is. And, another thing that I failed to mention, Don and I were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, is we talked about the iHeartRadio app earlier and how forward thinking that was about 10 years ago when iHeart Clear Channel at the time developed the iHeartRadio app. But like I said, they knew we were going to be in dashboards on people's phones. What they didn't see coming, and nobody did, was the evolution of the smart speaker and how, I mean, that has given terrestrial radio new life in the digital world. And we are the leaders there for music consumption because we are training and have been for 5 years to say, Alexa, play the River 97.3 on iHeartRadio. And sorry, I just turned my Alexa. Hold me unplug her. Hold on just a second. I'm unplugging Alexa right now. I hate to do that, but anyway. But yeah, so people are listening to the radio at home again. It's almost like the smart speakers are like the old radios back in the day. Mm-hmm. So we've even found new life on the smart devices. So I think that was something very forward thinking by the folks at the time, Clear Channel. They developed the iHeartRadio app, and it became so popular that they decided to change the name of the company to iHeartRadio a few years ago.
So we can kind of safely rest assured that radio isn't dead, nor will it be in the next 10 years anyway.
I hope not, because I need to get my kid through college, and then it can do whatever it wants to do. No, I'm kidding.
Let's move on to the other thing that we alluded to at the beginning of the podcast, and that is that Glenn has another avocation. By day, he's a mild-mannered program director / air personality. And by other times of the day and at night, he is a guitarist. Glenn plays. I've seen him play at bars and various other locales. John Tempane has that same avocation. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, Glenn. How does that work?
I've always just loved music, and I think every radio person at some level desires to be a rock star in some way. And I think every rock star desires to be on the radio in some way, at least a certain era of musician, because you hear so many of them doing their own shows and podcasts and being on, the satellite stations. They've got their own shows.
Yeah. Sirius XM is full of them.
Yeah. Because, I think it just comes from that love of music. And when I was younger, I wanted to be a rock star. And then I figured, well, you know what, if I can't play music, I'll play music on the radio. And that's why I got into radio, because it sort of was, and I wanted to be an actor when I was, in high school, and was in did a lot of theater and community theater and stuff. So I was able to use, music and the acting skills in this format, and it just kind of meshed. So then I had started playing music out, and I really love, just being out in front of people and sharing music with them and writing songs. And can't believe if I play something and somebody doesn't run out of the room, then I guess that's a successful
plus.
night.
I say the same thing, Glenn, every night. They're still all here. Okay, good. Right.
And I've done the solo thing, and I've told myself in the last 10 years or so, I don't care if I ever play by myself ever again. It's just not as fun as when you're with at least one other person, whether it's another guitar player or a percussion or a little trio. I have a trio that we do, Trio de Janeiro, and we go out. It's just bass, drums, and I play acoustic guitar, and we do all kinds of stuff you'd never imagine that, just that kind of a configuration would do. And it works. People have fun. That's all I wanted to see. People have fun and enjoy themselves and be able to escape a little bit. So it's just a little side hobby that I've had. I've just always loved music, and that's kind of an outlet that I've used to get to perform. That performance bug in me just has to come out somewhere. So.
And that was one of the questions I was going to ask you, actually, Glenn, is because I found almost exactly the same thing, that there are pleasures to be had as a member of a group that really are unequaled. I would get up in front of people solo, but actually, I like playing with a band. I like being part of a band sound and meshing with the art of other people.
Totally.
You know.
And Don alluded earlier that, I did middays on the river for, 15, 18 years. And that's totally by yourself. And it's just, man, it's hard to carry on a conversation. You have to pretend like you're talking to another person, which,
Yes.
you're one-to-one radio listener. But I've been doing mornings now for 10 years, and most recently with Amy Warner for the last almost 3 years. And when she's out and I'm by myself, it's the worst being by yourself talking on the radio.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel the same playing my guitar and singing. It's just, I can do it. It's just not fun.
Yeah.
Well, like right now, the three of us are talking, we're having fun. If I was just sitting here if I spent 30 minutes telling everybody the state of radio and what's going on, boring in my opinion, but you guys make it more interesting.
Well, Glenn, let me, thank you, Don. I wanted to ask you, Glenn, I mean, what are you doing at the moment? Because venues are few and far between, I would think, for right now. I know that I haven't played out since February, and I don't have a gig now until at least August. Our band doesn't, because obviously ain't no place to play. So
right.
What are you doing right now?
I did a thing when we started sheltering in place, staying at home back in March, I guess it was, early April, late March, early April. You know what it was? It was when Kenny Rogers passed away.
Yeah.
I got on and I hadn't played at home. I haven't been playing the guitar at home much for the past 10 years, probably. I literally play if I have practice with the band or am going out to play a show. So I hadn't sat around and played the guitar for a long time. And I got to do that a lot over the 2.5 months or so of COVID-19. And so I did the Gambler as just kind of a lark, just kind of like,
sure.
This, and we were going to do it as a sing along through, this Be Live platform, video platform, but we couldn't get the latency down. And it was going to be me and a few other people from the radio stations, different stations in our building and from our homes. And we couldn't get it to do it. So I was just like, screw it, I'll do it myself. And I did it, and it was pretty well received. And so from that, I started doing just different cover songs, just putting up videos of me playing so then it turned into, I'm going to learn a new song every day.
Wow.
And so I started posting a song every day. Wow. Every once in a while it'll be a song that I used to know and was just refreshing myself. But for the most part, I was learning a song every day and throwing up the video no matter what it sounded like. And then, of course, we musicians can have egos, and you couple that with the radio ego. Well, then it's like, well, I want it to look good and I want it to sound as good as possible. So I started trying to, and then I started recording it into my music software and syncing that with the video. And so, you always have to take it to that nth degree, but that kind of helped fill that void of not being able to play out. I was able to put some videos up on my Facebook page, and people seem to dig those. And then it coincided with the 20th anniversary of my CD coming out. So I started putting that up a little bit and doing a song from that here and there. So
yeah, you had a CD. You talk about that. That came out 20 years ago. I have a copy of it, so I feel really old at this point.
Well, we are, Don. So let's just we are very old.
So I not only feel old, I am old. Damn it.
You are accurate.
Yes. And everybody get off my lawn.
The CDs now make great coasters, and for the first time ever, I actually made it available on the streaming platforms. Just because the 20th anniversary snuck up on me, and it happened during COVID-19. And so I was like, I'm going to just do something with this while people can't do a whole lot, and maybe they'll check it out. And the thing I love the most about recording the album is 8 originals and 2 covers. And I covered Jackson Browne, These Days, and I covered Tom Petty, Southern Accents. The other 8 songs were mine. But the most fun I had doing it was right at the beginning of the digital recording age. And there was still, we played everything live. It's all real instruments, organic instruments. The vocals are real and live. There's no auto-tune or pitch change or anything like that. Because I recorded it in 99. It came out in 2000. And just the musicians from around here in Central PA that I got to play on it that were friends, and some were not friends I got to meet because I hired them to play on it. Just some of the best musicians around, and to get to watch these songs kind of come to life was the absolute best part of that project. And so hearing these again, it's like revisiting old friends and like, man, I remember when we recorded that part and how that arrangement came to life. And it was one of the highlights of my life. Yeah. Very cool. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. It's, as I'm sure you can appreciate more than most folks, Glenn, the COVID months have been an absolute Eden for at-home concerts, live concerts online, a cappella, recordings where, far-flung groups of musicians, record the same song, only singly, right? They work out the parts and then build up the recording like they were going to be doing a recording in a studio. And there's just been so much live music, and a lot of it very intimate. James Taylor sits in his living room with his family and plays his hits and things like that. It's just been so, if you love live music, it's been wonderful. It's been just great.
I think we'll look back on 2020 as like this renaissance of intimate live music, pushing the technology as far as we can to figure out what we can do and how we can play with each other, with people that aren't in the same room with us. Kind of like we're having a show right now. Not one of us is in the same room, and yet it sounds like we are.
The magic of radio transferred to the computer.
Well, there's a Christian radio talk show host. His name is Brant Hansen. He's also an author, and we got to know each other a little bit over the years. He's in Florida. He sent me a song, and we started doing, I think it was One by U2, and I just added some guitar and some harmonies on it, and we did a couple of different things just for fun, and it was just really cool. And then a guy, Bill Nork, who lives around here, who plays pedal steel guitar, he was like, hey, man, I'd love to lay something down for something that you're doing. And so I was like, okay, let's do Helpless by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young.
Oh, what a great tune. Yes.
And so I sent him that, and he put the pedal steel on it. Man, it makes me cry every time I hear it, not because of me, but just because he put down such a cool part. We've never met. We've known each other for years, but we've never met. And through social media and Facebook, we were able to actually jam together for the first time.
That is one of life's little pleasures. And I just want to chime in because I'm part of an email band. I have been for a long, long time. And we make the occasional album, and we have never been in the same room together. They're all in California. I'm out here, and we just do it, by WeTransfer or Dropbox or whatever it is. We figure out the parts, and then someone, mixes it so it sounds like a band. And I always listen to what other people play, and it's much more rewarding than listening to myself by myself. It's
totally.
It's so moving to hear somebody play music really nicely, to bring what they have to it that you could never have done yourself. It's just one of life's little pleasures. Anyway,
it really is.
And if anybody wants to hear what that sounds like, listen to our open and close music. That is John's virtual band.
That's right. Don told me that before we started recording, and I love that bed. I love the opening theme. It's very cool. And he said you guys all did it in totally separate locations.
Yes, we did. It was and that was recorded. That track, we started recording it in 1998. And this is inside baseball, but Glenn will appreciate it. We did we did the old trick where we recorded the drums and percussion on tape, 24-track tape, right?
Right.
So, and then everything else was digital.
Nice.
And and a lot of bands still do that. They get these old, clunky 24-track recorders and set it up and do the old John Bonham for the drumming,
Yeah, because you want the drums to sound real and breathing
and fat and
organic.
exactly.
You can't get that sound from a machine most of the time.
So not, the decay is all different. The analog decay is more like life. And at any rate, I knew you would enjoy that. But thank you so much. That was fun to do a long time ago.
Yeah. Great
and
stuff.
let's not let Glenn get away without talking about that CD. What's the title, and how could people get a hold of it and listen to it?
Thanks, man. It's called Skyline Sessions. It was recorded at Bill Ray, who used to own Ray's Music Shop here in Mechanicsburg for the longest time, and he had a recording studio out at his house. on Skyline Drive. So we just, creatively called it the Skyline Sessions. And you can get Skyline Sessions on anywhere you listen to music, Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon. I think it's even there's videos on YouTube of just the static album cover. But wherever you listen to, and it's on iHeartRadio too. I should just mention that. So check it out if you get a chance. There's some really good players on there.
All right. Hey, thanks very much, Glenn, for being with us today. You gave us a lot of insight into radio and into music. And it was nice talking to you. I know you think you hogged it, but believe me, it was fun just sitting back listening to you talk.
It was so great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. It's nice to virtually meet you, John. And Don, it's really great to reconnect again, man. Thank you guys so much.
And if you'd like to get in touch with us, just send us an email, musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com. musicalinnertube@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter. John is at @JTimPayne, and I'm at DonRooney9. Our webpage is Musical Innertube. That's musical spelled with 2 A's, MUSICAAL, Innertube. That's all one word, .libsyn, spelled LIBSYN.com. We're also on Stitcher, SoundCloud. You can give us a review on iTunes if you'd like. And if you want to check out old episodes of the Innertube, you can go to the Musical Innertube on YouTube. And don't forget, that's Skyline Sessions by Glenn Hamilton. He spells his first name GLENN. It's available wherever you stream music. And speaking of music, thanks again to the virtual band Car Radio Dog and John Timpane for providing our theme music.